everybody, to the Two Matts and a Jeff podcast. We are just a couple of guys here talking some sports, some middle-aged guys talking sports. And today we're talking about the NFL once again. We're going to talk about the best NFL teams of all time. So not franchises, but teams, specific years, specific teams. And we're going to give you our top teams of all time. So we're going to start with our number 5. Jeff, I think you're up first.
I'm going to start here today. So my number 5, I went with the 1984 49ers. They won Super Bowl 19. They had a 15-1 regular season. What I found really awesome about their team is that they won during the regular season. They won by an average of 17 points per game, and they beat the Marino Dolphins in the Super Bowl 38-16. And the other thing I thought was impressive, again, because I would watch football back then, but it wasn't like it was today, and I wasn't all into it and stuff. Like, Jerry Rice wasn't on that team yet. So when we think of the 49ers, you probably think of, oh my God, they probably had Jerry Rice then. They didn't even have Jerry Rice then yet.
Freddie Solomon.
Right. So, my number 5 was the 1984 49ers.
Well, my number 5 is the 1989 49ers. 14-2. Their 2 losses were by a combined 5 points. 2 losses by combined 5 points. Montana Rice, Jerry Rice on that team's a big star. They outscored their opponents in the playoffs 126-26. They had the best offense in the league. Their D had I think the 3rd best as far as scoring defense or whatever. And I think that if I remember correctly, they hammered the Broncos in the Super Bowl. 55-10 or something.
I have it right there actually because they're on my list.
Yeah.
The 55-10, it was the most lopsided Super Bowl win in history.
I remember where I was. I remember watching that with a party with friends or whatever, and it was just boring, so no one even watched the game or whatever.
Although as a record, that's awesome, but while you're watching it, it stinks.
You're not rooting for either
That's
team,
a commercial game right there.
Yes.
Unless I mean, well, and I guess in '89 the commercials were good. They're not what they were today.
No.
But
yeah, so they're my 5.
So my 5. And I probably should have them higher, to be truthful. And I jockeyed around a few things. But the 1985 Bears was my 5. They were 15-1, won the Super Bowl. And one of the things I looked for, obviously you mentioned, Jeff, like how much the margin of victory was, which was great. And I also looked for, players on the team that were names that are identifiable, big time names, and this team had it, right? The 85 Bears had McMahon, Ditka, Singletary, Buddy Ryan, in the defense, Walter Payton, so
the fridge.
Exactly, it was in the fridge. So the Super Bowl Shuffle, right? If you remember that, I mean, so if you don't know that out there, kids, go to YouTube, put in Super Bowl Shuffle, and this team is iconic, I think, for those reasons too. So all that stuff together, I think, just made them a great team and a great record, 15-1, which is, you're not getting too much better than that. There's only one team. We'll talk about them later, I'm sure. So there was my number 5.
I'm going to say, we'll get back to them first. I'm sure Matt's got them up there, too. I got them up there. All right, so I'm going to go with my number 4, and I had to go back to a team that my course didn't remember. They're older than me. The 1962 Packers, Green Bay Packers. Obviously, they won a championship, but not a Super Bowl, but they won a championship. They were 13-1. A couple things I wrote down for them is the most points. They scored the most points that year, and they gave up the least points in the year. So they were really great, And the other thing was they have 11 Hall of Fame players that were on that team.
Wow.
So 11. So think about it, really, when you think of offense, defense, half their team is in the Hall of Fame.
Well, you think about what you just said there, Jeff. It doesn't get any better than that. Their offense scored more points than everybody else. Their defense allowed less points than everyone else. Doesn't get much better than that with that kind of team. So
there's my number 4 Packers.
All right. So my 4 is one team you mentioned. I have 2 Niners teams on my list or whatever. The 84 Niners. Again, like you mentioned, 15-1. Montana, Roger Craig. Let's see what did I write down here. They outscored their opponents in the playoffs 82-26. They had the 2nd best offense in the league and the best defense. And as you had mentioned, they beat the Dolphins in the Super Bowl, paying them pretty good. And Marino and the Dolphins had the best offense, as I remember vividly.
And Marino never got back.
No,
So,
yeah,
which is surprising.
yeah.
Well, that piece there. How many players don't they think they're going to get back,
Yep.
and you might never get there again.
Yep.
Well, my number 4 team is the 1978 Steelers. So they were 14-2. One of the things that I read about them is that they changed the rules at the end of the 77 season for the 78 season because of the defense of the 77 Steelers, like the rule that you can't touch a guy until after 5 yards or receivers, those things. They made a few other rule changes. The Mel Blount rule, that's the 5-yard rule.
Right.
And they did that kind of specifically because of this team, and they still won. Again, some big names. Lynn Swan, Chuck Noll was their coach. They had 10 Pro Bowlers, 5 All-Pros, Terry Bradshaw, who I think is very underrated as a quarterback, in my opinion. I don't think he gets much credit for that, maybe because he's a goofball now. But I still like him out there as a commentator. And Franco Harris, Mean Joe Green, and very important to you local folks out there, they had a guy named Jack Delaplane who graduated from Pottstown
really?
High School.
I did not know
Yes, so that guy, and it's what's funny is that this is 1978. So for me, I was too little to know anything about it. And Jack Delaplane would come around when you were in Pottstown, and they would make a big to-do about it. And at the time, I thought, who's this guy? Never really heard of him.
Did you say what position did he play?
Oh goodness, I don't
He's
have
defense.
Defense.
Okay, I didn't know
That's
that.
why I
Yeah,
just know his
yeah,
defense.
But but he was on that team, and that was a big deal. But there's a local connection for people around here. So there you go, the 1978 Steelers.
I just want to piggyback. I had them on my honorable mention, and the big thing, of course, was they called the steel curtain
Steel curtain,
defense.
yes.
So, all right. So going to my number 3, seems like we're going back and forth here. Is my 1989 49ers. Let me see if I don't know if there's anything else I wrote. Yeah, I don't think I wrote anything else that was different than what Matt mentioned. But again, they were, I had the 2 49er teams on there as well on my list. I was kind of surprised I didn't have a Steelers. I was really thinking I was going to have a Steelers on there, but yeah, there was a couple of the Steelers that were honorable mention. But yeah, I had the 1989 Niners, so my number 3.
All right. Well, my number 3 is the 78 Steelers. Let's see, 14-2. Their 2 losses were by combined 10 points. You mentioned all the guys or whatever. I think 9 Hall of Famers, 5 on D, 4 on O. Only allowed 12.2 points per game on defense, and averaged 3 takeaways a game. I thought that was pretty interesting. But yeah, and as I mentioned previously, I believe, maybe it's a previous podcast, but as a Dolphins fan growing up in that era, I did not care for the Steelers, especially this around here or whatever. And it might have been this team or the 77 team, I'm not sure, was the first bet I ever lost.
All right. Well, my number 3 was the 89 San Francisco 49ers, 14-2. Jerry Rice, I think you didn't mention he wasn't on the other team, but he was on this
Definitely
team,
was
of
on
course. And, a lot of big names there, Montana and Young, both on that team.
Yeah.
Ronnie Lott, with big defensive
hitter.
name, yeah. They averaged 27.6 points a game and allowed 15.8 average points a game. So again, pretty good on both sides. They outscored opponents in the playoffs 126-26. That I thought was a stat there that I don't think I heard mentioned that I thought was worth mentioning. So that was my number 3.
Okay. Going my number 2, and I was debating on going number 2 or number 1. So we'll see where you guys go. My number 2, I put the 1972 Dolphins.
I'm not
Okay,
sure who
let's
you
see.
put ahead of them, but we'll see. Go ahead.
Okay, so obviously they were 17-0, perfect season, won Super Bowl 7. I mentioned in another previous podcast they still pop champagne if once the final team in the NFL loses a game. As I was looking up things, because again, I was only 1 when they won, so I had to look a lot of things
I
up.
wasn't born, by
Yeah.
the way, when they won.
So anyway, by looking things up, the reason that I decided then to put them at 2 is one thing I read is that they just said that they were just not really a dominant team, and they didn't have a real tough schedule. So again, I do agree though you have to beat everybody that's on your schedule. So that's with that being said, So that's one of the reasons I just didn't put them at number one. And one other thing, they were known for is their no-name defense, and they had 6 Hall of Fame players on that team. So
Go ahead. What do you got as your
So
number?
my number 2 is the 85 Bears.
Okay.
Which I'm wondering, but anyhow.
Yeah.
So 85 Bears, as you mentioned, I'm trying to think if there's anything you didn't mention. 15-1, 54 takeaways. Did you say that?
I did not say that one.
54 takeaways over the season. Did you say they outscored their opponents in the playoffs 91-10?
I did not. I didn't say that stat. I might have had it, but I did not say that one.
And they beat the Patriots in the Super Bowl, and what should have been, and everyone thought it was going to be, they were going to get a rematch against the Dolphins
Right.
in the only game that they lost during the
Right.
regular season, but they didn't get it because the Pats upset the
Right.
Dolphins in the AFC title game once again. But yeah, I think you mentioned everything else as far as that goes.
Well, my number 2 is the 62 Packers, which is a team you mentioned earlier. So you've said most of what I had, but I don't know if you said what I had too. They forced 50
I didn't
turnovers.
say no.
They're rushed for an average of 175.7 yards a game, and they won by the score of 49-0 twice, which is you look at that again. What does that show you about a team? 49 points is a lot to score, and shutting a team out and not letting them score showed that team was truly very dominant on both sides of the ball. And again, 62 was long before I was ever born, so not a team that I knew personally, but a great team.
Let me piggyback
Go
on this
ahead.
real quick. So they were on my honorable mention, and they were close to being in. But you mentioned nearly 30 points a game, and only allowed 10.6 a game. So
That's a big.
that's huge differential.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean that is a dominant team. So we are itching to know what is your
I
number
think I
one
know.
team that's
Has to
better
be.
than the
Yes.
Miami
Has to
Dolphins.
be.
in
I put the
1970.
1985 Bears.
Oh wow!
They won obviously Super Bowl 20. Let me mention the one thing. Let me see. So they won by an average of 18 points a game. The defense, 12 points per game. They only gave up 12 points a game. And the other thing with the defense, they shut out the Giants and the Rams in the playoffs. They gave up no points at all. And so, and again, they won 46-10 against the Patriots, again, because Marino, they lost it. And, Super Bowl shuffle and all that stuff. But I think the biggest thing for me there was when I started looking at all that, it just seemed like they were a more dominant team. Like if I thought, okay, if they played each other.
Well, era is.
Well, no, but I meant like,
Yeah.
but like just how we talked about with basketball.
Yeah, right,
You know what's interesting though is like that team, like a lot of great teams, have fantastic defenses. But most teams, when you think about them, you think about the high-powered offense.
Right.
But I think the truth of the matter is, if you look at it historically, a lot of teams we're looking at here had phenomenal defenses. And even a lot of teams that didn't make the list, you think about, the Ravens and some of those teams that have phenomenal defenses. That offense gets the glory, but defense wins the game. I think that holds out. If
Defense
you look
wins
at
championships.
yeah,
Right.
defense wins championships, and people don't think about it enough. They don't give them enough credit. They always think about the most important position in all of sports, which is the quarterback, and they forget about how important the defense is. But let's tell him why he's wrong about that, Matt.
Okay. So my number 1 obviously is the 72 Dolphins, and again, as I'm going to need you to back me up because I have a little bit of bias as I've discussed or whatever. But I mean, how can any team be better? No matter who they played, how can any team be better than a team that did not lose the entire time? They were first in scoring and yardage, offense and defense. So I know their schedule stunk, but that's not their fault. They were the best team on offense and the best team on defense. They averaged 211 rushing yards per game. Now, it's a different game in 72 than it is now. Nobody's going to average that now because no one's going to run the ball
They
that
won't
much.
run the ball that much.
Yeah,
That's why they won't average it.
Right. But 6 Hall of Famers. I think you probably mentioned Zonka, Kick, Morris, Warfield, Greasy, and the no-name defense. The one thing I wanted to say is, and I don't know if you noticed, Greasy was actually injured for part of the regular season. So Earl Morrall,
Yes.
who was Don Shula's quarterback in Baltimore at one point, was the backup and came in and I think had to play at least 4 or 5 games. So that's a telltale sign of a good team as well, or a championship team or whatever. They beat the Skins in the Super Bowl. And the quote I had was Zonka's quote that he says, "There's only one team that drinks the champagne." So that's for me. Again, I'm a little biased because I was a huge Dolphins fan back then or whatever. I still like them a little bit. But
Well, it might be part of it because I know usually Matt's someone like I know one of these podcasts throw somebody.
to throw a curveball or
Well,
whatever. So
it was. I will say I couldn't throw this curveball in because to me, this team, no one else has done it. Like if there were 3 or 4 teams that had done it, you could say, okay, well, your strength of schedule and those kinds of things play into it. But nobody else has ever done it. So when another team does it, to me, they might surpass this Dolphin team because I got no love for the Dolphins. I could care less about the Dolphins. I don't hate them. I don't love them.
Right.
I got nothing on them. They're neutral to me.
Right.
They really are. I have no feelings about the Dolphins whatsoever. But the point you made about the 2 quarterbacks, that's the sign of a true team. Because again, I just said a few minutes ago, like, the quarterback, the most important position in any sporting, and they lost their starting quarterback and still won all their games. They beat, which, just because I don't like the Patriots too, they beat the Patriots 52-0. 52-0. Now, that was at a time when the Patriots were not that great. But they shut out 3 teams. So the defense, like I just said, offense gets the glory, but defense wins the game, right? And their average 27.5 points that they scored and 12.2 that they allowed, which is, I think, what you kind of mentioned earlier on a different team.
And they would have won the Super Bowl. They would have had to pitch the shutout in the Super Bowl if it would have been for Gary Yepremian and the fame. You don't remember? Come on, I know you guys are younger than me. Look it up, okay, boys and girls. Look it up. Garo, Garo Yepremian was the Dolphins' place kicker. On a field goal attempt, I think when they were up 14-0, the snap got messed up. He got the ball, tried to pass it. It got bopped up in the air and was run the other way for a touchdown on an interception.
Did they not have the laces out?
I don't
Is
know.
that what happened there?
I don't know. I don't remember. But there would have been a shutout in the Super Bowl if it would have been for that. So.
Well, so we obviously agree on that. So how about anyone got any honorable mentions?
Well,
Teams worth mentioning?
I just put them
Your
in.
opinion doesn't count anymore. No, I'm just kidding.
I just put in there from some teams, and I have to I'm going to noticeably not put in honorable mention. I did not put any of the Patriots teams. Again, I don't know, when we can go, think about the team that went undefeated until they lost in the Super Bowl. But again, I didn't put them at all. But anyway, so I put the 78 Steelers. Somebody had them.
Yeah.
The Redskins in 1991. They went 14-2. Obviously, all these teams won Super Bowls.
But let me interrupt you there because I had the 91 Redskins on my honorable mention list too, just to interject there. 14-2, 3 shutouts, and they outscored their opponents at least at one stretch, 101-41. They played, and this was telling. I think you mentioned this earlier. They played the Troy Aikman Cowboys. They were playing the Giants under Parcells, the Eagles with Reggie White. So they were playing big-time teams in the NFC that you mentioned earlier about how tough that was. And I think that's a gauntlet there, 14-2 record to get to where they had to get to. So that was my only honorable mention.
I was going to say, was that Aikman's first year maybe or second year? No, any teams I'm saying.
No, 91.
Well, man, because 92.
Next year, Aikman went to the Super Bowl.
Well, that's the reason I'm mentioning is I have the Cowboys as one of my honorable mentions.
I want to say
92.
89 or 90.
Okay.
So I'd have to look that up.
But anyway, I had Cowboys in there, and then I had to throw these in there. The 99 Rams because of greatest show on turf. We talked about offense. Everybody loved that team with the offense. But
I had, let's see. You guys both had the 62 Packers on your list. I had them as honorable mention. They were right there. The Patriots, I had the 07 Patriots, the one that 16-1. They were 12.5 point favorites in the Super Bowl and should have never lost. They could be drinking champagne too every year, but they blew it.
Listen, it only matters if you win the last game.
Right.
And so that team, I kept all Patriots teams off my list. All of them. Because not just because I don't like them, but because, as I've said before, they cheat. And so, to me, that tarnishes any one individual team, even though, the coaching staff and so on, the coach was great, even though I hate him too. But, that kind of kept that out. And if you to go all the way and not win the game, I don't think you're talking at all about the 72 Dolphins if they lose in the Super Bowl.
No,
if you don't win the Super Bowl, I don't know how you can be up there in the greatest teams ever.
I just because they were this close to doing it. And Moss had
That only counts in horseshoes
and
hand grenades.
hand grenades. I was gonna say I know we could say
Horseshoes
that.
and hand grenades.
Yeah. But Moss had 23 touchdown receptions. Can you imagine if you had him in fantasy that year or whatever? But anyhow, so they were
were
on
great
there.
team.
I had the 76 Raiders. I mean, because that's my
I had sold
beginning
out.
of my era or whatever. Kenny the Snake Stabler and John Madden as coach or whatever. I don't know if that was a time when Lester Hayes had to stick him. I don't know if you guys remember Lester Hayes with the stick him on his.
I remember the
Sounds
name.
familiar.
As a cornerback, the ball would literally stick
Yeah.
to the outside. of his
Like that
hand.
receivers' gloves now. Like that.
Yeah. And then the 92 Cowboys you mentioned with Aikman, Smith, and Irvin. 52-17 in the Super Bowl, and if everybody remembers correctly, it probably would have been close to 60 if it would have been for Leon Lett
Right.
celebrating too early, running in
Yes.
the Tasker getting him from behind. But anyhow,
Well, I was gonna say the only thing I was gonna say is, hate to say, our team that
Yeah.
we're wearing here won. Well, they won a championship in '60, but it's but I think it also shows, like these are greatest teams of all time that it takes a lot to even get to there and win.
Yeah.
That's what they were saying. Like, the Super Bowl coming up.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's a lot involved, and in terms of teams and things, and I talk about this all the time in fantasy. There's luck involved, good and bad,
Yeah.
and I think that happens with teams too. I mean,
Yeah.
you lose your best player, and that can make or break a whole season. You lose your quarterback. I mean, the year the Eagles won, they just happened to get hot and lucky with a backup quarterback. But you lose your starting quarterback, that could just sink you. So there's or any number of other injuries, which is why going perfect or only losing one game is so incredibly hard, because any little thing can happen any guy can get injured any week. So you lose a great player even for a week or two, and it changes the trajectory of your team. So it is so incredibly hard to get there, and then to win it when you get there, like you said about the Patriots, that were really good, but they didn't win that last game. So it's really, really hard to get there. So, well, there you have it, guys. Some incredible NFL teams of all times. If you don't know those teams, check them out. Go to YouTube and check out some information about those teams specifically. You've been listening and watching the Two Matts and a Jeff podcast. Follow us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram, and we'll see you next time.